Good afternoon. Welcome to Midlands Today. I'm Joanne Malin. A parade and service is to be held to honour a soldier who was killed in Iraq exactly 20 years ago this weekend. The tribute to Corporal Stephen Albert will take place in a garden of remembrance set up close to his widow's home in Stoke-on-Trent. He died in a friendly fire incident, and an inquest found that his death was the result of a catalogue of failures. Peter Wilson reports.
At her home in Stoke-on-Trent, Debbie Albert is surrounded by memories of her soldier husband Stephen, father to her 2 sons and her soulmate. 20 years after he was killed in Iraq, no one has replaced him in her heart.
He was everything to me. He was just my world. I had a feeling in my heart that something bad was going to happen, and he just wasn't coming home. And no matter how many times I told him, he'd just say, "Don't be daft, of course I'm coming home."
35-year-old Corporal Stephen Albert was serving with the Queen's Royal Lancers in 2003, part of the invasion of Iraq. He was the victim of friendly fire when his Challenger tank was hit by British forces. An inquest found that his death and another young soldier's was a completely avoidable tragedy.
An apology would have been nice, and they've never apologised. So I think I'd appreciate at least 20 years on if they could apologise to me.
This coming Saturday is the anniversary of Stephen's death. 2 local politicians are helping with a memorial to her husband. The local MP also wants to reopen her fight for justice.
Ultimately, what I want to see come out of this is that soldiers have the right equipment, they have the right training for tactics in the battlefield, and if there isn't that foresight, that planning, that equipment, then there has to be accountability within the structures of our armed forces.
A parade and service will take place at the garden set up in memory of Stephen. Debbie is not bitter, but she remains angry at the deficiencies and mistakes that led to her husband's death.
He hasn't died in vain, because I've tried to make a change in different areas for military families and for families and everybody going forward, and I hope that will become his legacy.
The Iraq War and all its controversy may be forgotten by some, but Debbie Albert is determined to fight on. Peter Wilson, BBC Midlands Today, Stoke-on-Trent.
Next this lunchtime, highways teams in the West Midlands receive only 2/3 of the money they need to repair potholes and other road maintenance issues. That's according to the annual Local Authority Road Maintenance Survey. The government last week pledged an extra £200 million to fix potholes, but a driver from Nuneaton whose car was damaged by one of them says motorists are paying the price for years of underspending.
You have to maintain your car anyway by law, but when it's something that's not your fault, it's just more galling, because you think, well, that's money I could have spent on my heating, on my food bill, on everything else that we've got to pay out for at the moment, which is getting a bit ridiculous.
We are calling on central government to recognise the fact that there needs to be a fundamental change in the way that we fund local authority maintenance. We need to move away from budgeting on a year-on-year basis. We need to move to longer-term funding horizons.
Thousands of bus passengers are being advised to allow more time for journeys as strike action by thousands of drivers continues. Only a limited service is running, while 3,000 National Express drivers in the Unite union take action after rejecting a pay rise of more than 14%. The West Midlands Mayor says negotiations must continue.
I would like to see National Express management and the leaders of the Unite the Union sitting down in a room to thrash out an agreement. Always in these situations, the 2 sides have got to work together, and they should both be thinking about the passengers who are disrupted.
Well, staying with transport now, because it's been announced this morning that Birmingham has lost out to Derby to become home to the national headquarters of Great British Railways. The new public body will own the rail infrastructure and set most fares and timetables. Conservators have been appointed to undertake restoration work on Birmingham Cathedral's 4 stained glass windows. They were designed by the city-born painter Edward Burne-Jones. The work will include removing a build-up of debris and repairing areas of cracking, failed leading and paint loss. Scaffolding will be put up at Easter and will remain in place until later this year. In football, Aston Villa women have drawn FA Cup holders Chelsea in the semi-finals of the tournament. It's the first time in the club's history that Villa have reached the last 4. The side beat Manchester City in the quarter-finals. Both semi-finals will take place on Sunday, the 16th of April. Now it's World Poetry Day, and one poet in the Potteries is celebrating by launching a series of performances in unusual venues. Nick Degg's 26-date A to Z tour will take in places like cafes, pubs, a retirement village and even a boarding kennels. And as it's World Poetry Day, he's penned a piece especially for Midlands today. It's all about the power of poetry.
Poetry is a bacon butty when nothing else will do. Poetry is a cup of tea when you're gasping for a brew. Poetry is fresh and clean like a newly ironed shirt. Poetry is a vacuum cleaner sucking up the dirt. Poetry is a wheelbarrow when you need to move some rubble. Poetry is a telescope. Poetry is the Hubble. Poetry is an overcoat. Poetry is a shoe. Poetry is someone's lips saying, I love you. Poetry is a vehicle, the words are the fuel. It can take you into space or even back to school. Poetry is read by cows wearing scarves of silk. Poetry is unconventional, sometimes it doesn't rhyme. Poetry is a handshake or a hug from a friend. Poetry is conversations you hope will never end. Poetry is about honesty and very rarely doubt. Poetry is an angler's smile when he's caught a 10-pound trout. Poetry is a hot cross bun with lashings of best butter. Poetry is a wardrobe that gets rid of the clutter. Poetry uses metaphors to get the point across. Poetry is both heads and tails, so it always wins the toss. Poetry is your holiday train waiting at the station. Poetry can be anything if you've got an imagination.
Poetry is a terrific Tuesday, even if it's raining. So what we need is a weather wizard. Stand by for Sarah Blizzard.
Good afternoon. Well, it is going to be quite a blustery afternoon. We've got a deep area of low pressure which is controlling the weather through today and tomorrow. It's bringing in a number of weather fronts as well from the Atlantic. But ahead of those weather fronts this evening, we will see some showers as we're heading now into the afternoon. Bit of brightness in between as well, but the wind's strengthening. So I think gusts of up to 40 miles an hour quite possible, and it's from a mild direction. So a daytime temperature of 15 Celsius today. Now through the evening and overnight though, we lose the showers. We see the cloud increasing, and we've got this band of heavy rain working its way up from the southwest, and the wind will strengthen further for a time as well. But you can see that rain does clear quite quickly, so the clearer sky is starting to arrive, which means that we should start tomorrow with a fair bit of sunshine around, and it will be a reasonable day. There's going to be a few showers though into the afternoon once again, but the sunshine returning again by late afternoon, with the daytime temperature tomorrow closer to 14 Celsius and still remaining quite blustery as well into the afternoon. Now, over the next few days, it stays quite unsettled. It's going to stay quite wet at times, but we are keeping the milder air, so the temperatures aren't too disappointing. I think there's the chance of a change, though, for the second half of the weekend, when the temperatures might just take a bit of a tumble.
That's all for now. Thanks for watching.